This video explores fragments in Android. It's part 1 of a 7-part series. We start with a broad overview and then move into static fragments. The objectives are stated here with a timeline for when they appear in the video. This is just a short preview of a much longer video. Visit ProfessorAndroid.com for more information. Okay, so the answer to the question, what's the coolest thing in Android, when asked, is fragments. So I'm going to get into exactly what fragments are in a moment, but quickly, they were given birth basically for the need for Android to support multiple screen sizes. Sometimes you have a tablet, sometimes you have a phone, and you want your application to look great in both environments. And fragments are one of the very cool tools we can use to solve that problem. Before we get into a more in-depth discussion about what fragments actually are and how to use them, it would be helpful if you've gone out to the developer website, read this link on fragments in its entirety. It would be also helpful if you went out to the developer website and at least browsed through this document that talks about supporting multiple screen sizes. Okay, so while you were, and I'm assuming now at this point you've done that, so while you were reading the document on fragments, you will see that there's a statement there that says, Android introduced fragments in Android 3.0 API 11. So if we left that statement right there, that would mean that you can't use fragments unless you're running on API 11. So if you're going to use fragments, you have to build against API 11 Android 3.0, and you've now said any device that's running a version of Android earlier than API 11 will not be able to use my application because I'm building against 3.0 API 11. Well, okay, let's see how that affects us. And we go out here and look at this current distribution chart that I'm pulling up on July 9th, 2012, and we go, well, that's a bad idea. Because we can come out here and look at this pie chart and going, I've only got this little area to deal with, Android 3.0 and above, and I alienate me from all the rest if I went ahead and made that decision. So unless you're building a very specialized application to only run on a tablet and you don't care about the phone market, you're not likely at the point where you'd make a decision to build an application that's just going to run against 3.0 and above. But yet fragments are really cool, and they allow you to do so much to support multiple screen sizes. What they did with the Android operating system is they allowed the ability to take some really cool features introduced in Android 3.0 and above, such as fragments and loaders and a few other things, and put them in what they call a support package or compatibility package. I've seen it under both names. And if you add that support/compatibility package, I'll just call it the support package from now on, to your application, it takes some of the features that are in 3.0 and allows you to use them actually back all the way to Android 1.6. And so that's the approach we're going to take, because I'm going to say I'm going to build against 2.3. I guess we're really not doing anything that wouldn't allow us to build against 2.2 and add that piece of the pie back in. But I've just been building against 2.3.3 for most of these demos. I'll continue to do that. And we'll go, let's use that compatibility package so we can use the fragments that were added in API 11 back in an earlier API. So that's the first step we need to take. In order to do that, in your Eclipse, if you have not already, you need to do this. Go up to your SDK manager. And by the way, in mine, I've deployed Jelly Bean Android 4.1 API 16. That was released as I've been doing this video series, and I think I'm going to build a tablet against that for this demo today. But at any rate, you need to look down and make sure that you have installed under Extras the Android support library, and that will add the option to put that Android support library in your application so that you'll be able to use fragments without having to build against Android 3.0 and above, and keeping your application open to a much larger base of devices. If you have not installed this, go ahead and install that in your Eclipse. So before we get started in Eclipse, I just want to give you a vision of where we're going. In the reading on fragments on the Android developer website, we see this common problem, and that's the problem we're going to be solving, and in fact solving 3 times. And that is the classic list view, detail view. I see a list of items here. When I click at it, I want to see additional details over here. And of course, when we're running on a tablet, larger device, we have room to see both at the same time. But when on a smaller device, we need to swap out one view for the other because there's simply not enough room to show both. And that's one of the things fragments were just designed to help us do. And when we do that, we're going to solve this in 3 different ways. So let me just discuss those up front. This outer box I'm going to draw here represents an activity. I'm just going to call that activity A. And then inside that activity, I'm going to draw what I call fragment A, and I'm going to draw what I call fragment B. And of course, this just represents a single activity. This represents what we might consider to be our list view, and this might be what we understand to be our detail view. When we're running on a tablet, we can see both of those at the same time and everything's good. But when we're on a phone, we don't have the screen real estate for that. And of course, I might not be running on a tablet, I might be running on a phone where my activity has to be much smaller, my activity A. And then I might only have room to show fragment A on my activity A at one time, my list fragment. And then when I click on some item I want to see more details about in fragment A, I need to replace the space taken up with fragment A with fragment B. And the first approach I'm going to take to do that is going to be use what's called static fragments. Both of these fragments, here and here, and both of these fragments, fragment A and fragment B that I never actually displayed at the same time, are going to be statically declared, and they're both actually always in memory, even though when we're running on this example, we may not see both fragments at the same time. Both fragments will actually exist in memory at the same time. So the first example is going to be the use of static fragments, and is perhaps the easiest way to solve the problem. Then we're going to move on and say, well, we want to understand fragments a little deeper, and we're going to solve the same problem again, this time using what's called dynamic fragments. Instead of statically, here's activity A, and again here is fragment A and fragment B taking up our screen real estate. And again showing that on a tablet. But what we're going to do here, instead of statically declaring these, we're going to dynamically create them. And we're going to do a little work programmatically to place fragment A on activity A and to place fragment B on activity B. And then also when we're running on a phone, and we have more limited screen real estate, we're going to say, yeah, I'm on activity A, and fragment A is there, and I click on some list view, and I want to see the details. Under the previous example, I simply can hide activity A, but it's still in memory, and then I show activity B with activity A remaining in memory. But under this example, I'm actually going to remove the dynamically created fragment A and replace that with a new dynamically created fragment B will then be put in its place. Very similar scenarios for those two, one using static fragments both in memory with kind of a show and hide scenario, and one using dynamic fragments where both aren't actually in memory at the same time. So keep in mind, in those two approaches, we only ever had a single activity that hosted sometimes 2 fragments and sometimes 1. Then with the final approach we're going to take is going to be a 2-activity approach, where when we're on, again, a tablet, a larger device, we're going to have activity A hosting fragment A and fragment B. And when we're on a large device, like a tablet, the only thing that's going to come into play is a single activity, activity A. And activity A is going to show fragment A, the list view, and fragment B, the detail view. However, under this final approach, we're going to say if we have limited screen real estate, we're going to use a 2-activity model. Activity A will host fragment A, the detail view, and we will also have an activity B that hosts fragment B. And of course, we'll only need activity B to host fragment B when we're running on a device with limited screen real estate, such as on a phone. So we're going to solve this problem 3 times with those 3 approaches. And through the course of that, we'll discover much of the functionality that's important to us about fragments. Okay, so a couple important things when you start this project. Again, remember that you must have come in and clicked on your Android SDK Manager and make sure the Android support library is shown as installed. Then when you create that project, I'm going to call this Fragment Demo, and I'll just stay building against 2.3.3 and 2.3.3. I'm going to create a custom icon using my launcher, and I think I like my background color actually to be black for that. We'll go ahead and give it a blank activity to start with, call it main activity, and just call its XML layout file main, and finish. And then one thing you want to make sure you do on this project from the very beginning is click on that project folder and go down to the Android Tools and say Add Support Library.